We do identify with our profession. That's why we have different degrees and we are expecting to land in different jobs, right? So yes, one is profession. Then, what else? Gender, isn't it? Gender is a big thing because we do get classified according to our gender. So that's another one. Anything more?
The place that we are from.
The place we are from, and probably the culture associated, pretty much the place and culture kind of thing. What else?
The people around you.
Wow, okay, the people around you, your friends, and you know who you are with, you know, you have people around you, simple as that. And you want a certain kind of neighborhood and you don't want a certain kind of neighborhood. You don't want a certain kind of people around you. You choose who you want, where you want to be, for example. Anything more?
Hobbies.
Eh? Hobbies? Yeah, perhaps, yeah, the hobbies. Yeah, that's why we have different clubs, for example, right? Different hobbies, yes, King. Age group is a big thing. We want to be with, we want to associate with probably our own age group many times. Or some people want to associate with a certain other age group. But it varies. So the age group where we do associate with the age group. We belong to a certain age group for sure. Anything more?
Our behaviors.
Our behavior, yeah, sure. Our behavior, our character, even our values, right? Anything more? You didn't tell something very simple. If I ask you who are you, or your name. Probably that is the simplest, right? You know, we have a tag, that's our name, so we are addressed by that. So yes, definitely our name. Anything more? Oh yeah, your relations based on your familial relationships. Yeah. Anything more you want to say? What's our identity? How do we what's our identity? Our Insta account? Probably our email address, right?
Our family?
Our family background. So actually if we go in this kind of, or the fashion we like, right? The clothes we like, we want to appear in a certain way. So if we go on with this list, actually we can keep going, am I right? There are so many ways we can be identified. Nationality, we do get identified with our nationality. Now, we are bringing this point because we can write so many things about our identity. However, the question may arise, can we change any of these identities? We had to look at the first one. Profession, can we change? Definitely. And some people really want to change their profession. And some people are happy with their profession. But it is something which we can change, right? Even though it can be a big part of our identity, but still it can be changed. How about the gender? Can we change the gender? Yes, we can, if you wish. Culture and place we associate with, can we change?
Yep.
Yes, we can. The culture, we can definitely change. People get changed when you move from one place to another place. If you get absorbed into some other culture, for example. So you may be from some culture, but it can change. What's next? We can read. Year. Oh yeah. Can we change the year? The age? Can we change the age? No? Yeah? Mentally maybe. But the reality is you don't need to do anything. Your age is changing all the time. Every moment, every second. Right? This is something you don't need to do anything. You don't need to endeavor to change your age. Just be around. Right? What's next? Behavior. Okay, behavior can we change? Definitely we can. Sometimes we need to change our behavior for good for ourselves and others. How about the next? What's the next? People around us. Yes, we have to. Then, hobbies. Yes, we can change our hobbies, right? And we do. What's next? Name. Can we change our name? Definitely we can. What's next? Relationships. Yeah, we had different roles, different relations. It's changing, right? We can be a friend, can be a mom, can be whatever. It changes, keep changing the relationships. Next, social media. Oh yeah, of course, yeah. Sometimes the account gets closed forcefully. All right, anything more? Oh yeah, definitely. That is meant to be changing, right? It's meant to be changing. So yes, we can talk many things about our identity. We can talk many things about ourselves. But apparently everything is changing. Isn't it? Here, whatever we have written, whatever we brought about, everything is changing. So what is giving us the identity, which is core to us? You feel as a self, right? The feeling of self, which is there when you are a kid. Yes? You can go to your mom, you can go home, you can see the photos, the small photos of yours. And you can see the current photos, and you can see yourself in the mirror. You can project yourself into the future after 10 years, after 20 years, after 30 years, after 40 years, after 50 years. Maybe scary, right? But who is witnessing the changes that the body is experiencing? So what is giving that identity? Your mind? Okay, good. Anything else? Conscience. Anything more? From a scientific viewpoint, what is giving identity to ourselves? What is giving the feeling of self? It's just pumping the blood. But what is really giving the identity? Our brain, yeah, isn't it? Our brain. So, is that brain behind our identity? Let's explore. Okay? So, we are looking into different aspects to make us think deeply into our identity. So, he mentioned about the mind. The mind is also changing all the time, right? You can be sitting here, you can be elsewhere in your mind. And even if you try to focus, mind can go everywhere. That's why we have some meditation, trying to focus. Even while doing yoga, try to focus. So the mind can also be changing. So what is giving that core identity, which is witnessing the changes to the body and the mind here from a scientific perspective? You mentioned it is the brain. Brain is giving that sensation of the selfhood. Okay, let's see what we have here. Okay, now we can go back one thing. I'll just come to go back one more. Not yet. So there is an interesting study took place. Okay, about people who have serious problem in their brain. It's a disease known as hydrocephalus. In hydrocephalus, you might know, hydrocephalus, the cranium is filled with cerebral liquid, and practically there is no gray matter. That is hydrocephalus, a particular condition for the brain. And generally speaking, these people are mentally challenged because there is no brain substance. Now, John Lawler, a neurologist from London, UK, from the University of Sheffield, happened to meet a student doing honors in mathematics, and seeing him doctor told, because he's into brain scan and studies, can I study on you? Can you be my subject? Interestingly, he agreed. He did the brain scan, and they surprisingly, doctor found out that he had hydrocephalus, and practically 98% of his cranium was devoid of any brain substance. 98%. At the same time, he was doing his honors in mathematics. He was brilliant. He had IQ more than 125. Then the question arises: where is it? What is the source of the intelligence? What is the source of consciousness? What is the source of the self? What is the source of mind? What we thought everything we can map to the brain, but apparently it is empty. Nothing is there. What is the source of it? Then onwards, Dr. Lorber started studying many patients with hydrocephalus and studied what's really going on. It was really intriguing, and interestingly, this was his conclusion. You can just go to the next one. His conclusion, he wrote a very provocative article: is your brain necessary? Question mark. Probably for most of us, yes. But there are people who can function normally without any brain substance. So he had a group of people who had 95% of the cranium devoid of brain substance, but 50% had IQ over 100, which means they are normal, they can survive, they can sustain, and a small percentage had even IQ over 126. So there's a question mark. Where is this identity? Where is the mind? Where is the intelligence? Where is it coming from? Okay, we are not going to answer this at this point. Alright. So from here, shall we move on to something more? Something to think. Because we were taught everything is coming from the brain. But even from the medical science, we have some examples where it cannot be really mapped accurately. So what's the source? That's the question. Let's go to the next one. Oh, okay, this probably you may all know, the great brain experiment. Can you just go to the next? Probably. Have you seen this one? Brain mapping? Yes? Okay, what is that?
It's an illustration of like where in the brain corresponds to sensational movement
Exactly.
of various parts
Yeah.
of the body.
Yeah, Penfield, Dr. Penfield, a Nobel laureate, he did this monumental study about mapping the brain and the movement of different parts of the body. So that's what you can see there. Interestingly, he did this mapping as part of his studies. He did a very interesting experiment in which what the experiment is generally he would put the electrodes on the brain and stimulate certain regions, and depending on the region where it gets stimulated, different limbs will move. It's like the legs will be moving, whatever, according to where the stimuli is given, a particular limb would move. So that was the essential study. But Penfield was very intelligent, of course, he did his job. He asked a question: are you making the decision to move your leg or hand or whatever? So in all cases, all the subjects did make the statement that no, we are not making any decision. So that made Penrose think that generally we think that we are the brain, our identity is originating from the brain. Then how is it possible that we are actually giving the sensation of movement? It means the brain should feel that I'm making the decision, but why is never happening? So there was no answer to it. Rather, his conclusion, he made the statement: the brain is like a computer, but it is programmed outside itself. So something from outside, or something which is not really made of this neural hardware, is causing the identity. But what is that? Answer remained unknown. Okay? Shall we go further? A bit more. What do you think? Yes? Ready? So now we are getting into a bit more paranormal experiences, which are not really paranormal anymore. It is normal for many people. So this is, let's see what is there. Okay, this is another interesting one. Before that, it is as the idea was that our core identity is originating from the brain. The reason being the neural cells are not regenerating. That is the concept existed for a very long time till late 90s. And Elizabeth Cloud, she found out that no, that's not true. All the cells, including our neural hardware, is getting renewed. So again the question came. So far we thought that identity is from the brain because the brain is remaining fixed, static, without much change, and that is giving us the identity for the whole life. Because if you look back to your childhood to now, you feel I'm the same person. Do you feel that? My mind is changed, my perception might have changed, thoughts might have changed, the body is changed, my ideas have changed, but the experiencer is the same person. Do you have that feeling? I have that feeling. Everyone has that feeling. So the question is, where is that identity from? And the conclusion given till late 90s, it is because of your brain, because it is fixed, it is static. However, that was also proven wrong. So now, let's move. I think, yeah, this is something which is known as the out-of-body experience, near-death experience. There are many, many instances of that where people too have vision of their body when they are completely unconscious, going through an operation, or one may be clinically dead, but still they come out and they give the whole explanation of what is going on. So here, this is the studies done by one of the doctors in America. Initially, of course, he was very skeptical, he didn't believe in any of these kind of things, but two instances actually moved him to deeply study about the subject. One was American singer and playwright Pam Reynolds. She had to go through a hypothermic cardiac arrest for the brain surgery. Means there has to be a surgery in the brain, and for that they cannot have blood in the brain before cut off the brain because it is very dangerous, you die. So they have to cool down the heart, so it's called hypothermic cardiac arrest. So they stop the heart for some time, so the blood does not pump to the brain, so there's no blood in the brain, and then they can cut off and do the surgery. So she was going through that. After this, of course, when the surgery is going through, the person is completely unconscious, as you can imagine. But Pam came back to consciousness and started narrating what went on in the surgery and the conversation that was going on. So it was a big surprise for everyone. And one of the interesting things Pam pointed out was her arteries are small. So one of the things the doctors was telling us, her arteries are small. So there is no way Pam could imagine that her arteries are small or big, because it's something that we are not conscious about. Similarly, there are a few instances that made this doctor think about it. And the similar instance took place in another surgery where a construction worker from New York was getting operated, and he also started, after the operation, he was practically unconscious, clinically dead. He came out and started narrating what was going on. And this made him to study hundreds and thousands of cases. And I think he compiled a book. So here, this is the one by Michael Sabon, Recollections of Death, a Medical Investigation. So again, how is it possible that a person is literally unconscious and in many cases clinically dead, is able to recollect what's going on when they are completely unconscious, and medically it is unexplainable? Any thoughts so far? How is it possible? It didn't happen to you. It didn't happen to you, yes.
Yeah, I was in near-death experience. I fell 3 stories and I didn't get near-death experience like this.
You didn't get any experience like this.
No, it was just I passed out and then I woke up.
Okay, yeah. For many people, that's true. For many people, it is just they're out and then they're up. Congratulations, you're up. You're with us. You get to go through that experience, but you're with us. That's great. Yes, for many people, no, but many people, yes, they did have such kind of experience. So a proper study. These are all based on experiences, and there is a very interesting study done on this by Dr. Sabam. This Dr. Sabam. This is from. We'll see the next one. His whole plot was to have the objective markers and study in different hospitals, thousands of cases, where people do have these kind of experiences. So he's a resuscitation expert, Sam Parnia, and he did this study for many, many hospitals across US and Europe. So we'll see what he has to say. It's a very interesting interview. Yeah, this is the details, 15 hospitals, and all the details how they did the studies. Can go further, yeah.
So what happens when we die? It's a question that humanity has wrestled with throughout history. But a new study conducted by NYU may have found some answers. Dr. Sam Parnia is the Director of Critical Care and Resuscitation Research at NYU Langone School of Medicine, where he ran this study. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Parnia.
Pleasure.
So, what would you say, what actually happens when you're clinically dead?
You know, when people die, essentially it's when the heart stops. So this has been going on for as far as we know, millennia, not longer. And when the heart stops, you stop breathing and your brain shuts down, and that's how we declare people dead. And that's when we give a time of death and we give them a note. And really, to be honest with you, until about 50 years ago, that was the point of death. So people become lifeless, motionless, the brain shuts down. But now through advances in medicine, we can actually bring people back to life, even after they've gone beyond that threshold of death. And study what happens to them. And one of the interesting things, of course, is that the brain completely shuts down, as I said. But what's fascinating is that the cells inside the body, and particularly the cells inside the brain, do not suddenly become annihilated. They go through a process of decay that can take a few hours, which is why we can actually medically bring people back to life after they have technically gone beyond that threshold of death for tens of minutes, if not hours of time afterwards. And that, of course, raises many interesting questions about what happens when we die.
So tell me more about this study. How did you conduct it? And tell me about how you came about reaching your findings or conclusion.
No, I'm an intensive care doctor, so my job is to essentially save people's lives and prevent them from dying. But unfortunately, people do die, and we try to revive them. What we have found is that over the last few decades, many millions of people have now come back, and many of them have reported, actually, anecdotally, that they've been able to see and hear things going on, even though from our perspective, they should have been dead and their brain should not be functioning at all. And so we became intrigued to study this, one, because it was fascinating, and two, because we tried to revive people without brain damage and to ensure they don't have any disorders of consciousness, so not becoming like brain damage or having a vegetative state. At any rate, so this particular study is the largest study ever carried out in the world. It was done in 15 medical centers across the US and in Europe. And we studied more than 2,000 people who've gone through this cardiac arrest or process of death. And we did not expect people to have any consciousness or awareness. But intriguingly, up to 40% of people came back and had a perception of being aware of what was happening to them, even though they had technically gone beyond the threshold of death.
Why do you think that is?
Well, there's a lot to it. I should also add that among that group, 10% had a very deep, profound mystical experience that was very true to them. But interestingly, 2% actually had full awareness, could describe all the events that were going on that were validated. So of course the question is, why does that happen? And we don't have the answers, because to our scientific model, when people have died, there should be no more conscious awareness going on. But it sounds like maybe consciousness is able to continue, and by that I don't mean that they're awake, but that entity that makes us who we are, makes Sam who he is, makes Rena who she is, the self, the mind, seems to continue and doesn't become annihilated after a person has gone through that process of death.
Were there any of the people that you studied that completely lost all consciousness?
Well, that's what I was trying to explain. Everybody loses consciousness immediately as soon as the heart stops. It's not like they're awake and watching us.
So you mentioned there were some people who remembered there was some sort of mystical experience that they were going through. Were there some people who said, nope, didn't feel anything, didn't?
So some people don't have any recollections. What we don't know is whether they had experiences and forgot it afterwards, and that may be what's happening. Because of course we forget a lot of things, and most of the people who are brought back have issues to do with their treatments. We give them sedative drugs, which wipes out their memories. So that's part of what we're studying now, is does everybody have this experience, and how long does mind and consciousness continue in some format, even though we've gone beyond the threshold of death?
Do you have some sort of conclusion as to how far the mind and consciousness goes?
Again, from what we can determine, which is actually fascinating, and it raises questions about our whole science about what happens when we die, is that it appears that even though people have gone beyond that threshold of death and their brain has shut down, that entity that we call consciousness, the mind, the psyche, whatever you want to call it, does not seem to become annihilated. From the evidence we have, at least tens of minutes, if not hours of time afterwards. How long beyond that, we don't know at this point.
Interesting, yeah? That the consciousness is continuing. So it is a cutting edge research in medical science. However, this is there in the age old yoga wisdom, that the consciousness is not part of the mind, not part of the body. Rather, the consciousness is giving life to the body as well as the mind, which is independent of the body and the mind, the real self. So we can see from here, the modern medical science is pointing us towards that. Why it cannot show us directly? Because the approach, the methods are just material, showing or using practically mechanical techniques. It's neural, it's a hardware. So the life is beyond it, and that's why even without the help of external consciousness, even when the neural hardware is not functioning, still one can have the perceptions, one can have the recollections, because it is existing beyond. And that's why here Dr. Sampani is mentioning that the consciousness continues even after the threshold of the so-called death. But when it comes to Yoga Wisdom, Bhagavad Gita and other books, it's always been mentioned that the witness who is experiencing the changes to the body and the mind is always continuing. From birth, we had a small body. We can remember that the same person is witnessing now. The same person will be witnessing in old age. The same person will be witnessing at the time of death, because death is nothing but change of body, that's all. But the person continues. So that is the idea the spirituality is giving us from the ancient perspective. Of course, modern science can understand more. We had to increase our perspective. Don't just stick to the old views, limited views, rather the real science means it must include spirituality as well. And if we can see that, then we can get a complete understanding of what's going on. Any thoughts so far? Any reflections? Yes.
Is it related to the concept of souls?
Yes, that is the real self. You can say, you can call it soul, you can call the real self Atma in Sanskrit. We can use different terminology, it doesn't really matter. But there is the actual self which is continuing, which is beyond the changes of the body and the mind. Yes.
How does this connect with the indigenous of the first Australian perspective? How does this Taiwan worldview connect with spirituality, connect with indigenous point of view?
Yeah. Is it connect to the indigenous point of view as well? Is it a comment or?
Asking a question, how does it link? how does this philosophy link with the indigenous views on spirituality?
Generally, in the indigenous views, there is an understanding of the self separate from the body and the mind. That is the ancient viewpoints are all like that. It's all connected to the self which is separate from the body and the mind, which is witnessing, which is taking part and connecting to the body and the mind, but still remains separate. So that we call as the real self. Some people say soul, which is eternal. There is a continuum where life is going on. Body changes. For example, we can change our shirt, the top. We can change all the clothes. So many times we have thrown old clothes and we have accepted new clothes. Can we count? Probably not. Similarly, we can accept newer and newer bodies. That is one lifetime. That's it. And the next and the next. It continues. Shall I show you something interesting? Which I found is very interesting. So when we had this discussion, then it's interesting to see. We just move fast forward. Yeah, it's okay. You can move forward. Yeah, this is it.
Hello, I'm Robert J. Sawyer, and this is Supernatural Investigator. This week, we investigate the concept of reincarnation. Half of the planet's population shares the same belief, that some part of us survives death, and that reincarnation is a real possibility. You may be surprised to learn that the most compelling support does not come from the world of religious or spiritual studies, but from the world of science. Tom Harper is one of those seeking answers, and this week, he's our Supernatural Investigator.
I've come to the point with regard to reincarnation that I think not only is it a worthy subject of investigation, but that the evidence strongly suggests that it may, in fact, be true. Well over 50% of the Earth's inhabitants believe in some form of reincarnation. So it's very widespread.
And for Tom Harper, the most compelling evidence comes from the work of the late Dr. Ian Stevenson and his successor, Dr. Jim Tucker.
This work began here at the University of Virginia back around 1960. Ian Stevenson was the chairman of the Department of Psychiatry. When he heard about these cases from various parts of the world of very young children who said that they remembered previous lives, and he was curious enough where he decided to investigate, and spent the next 40 years of his career traveling to various parts of the world. And he and his colleagues during that time have now collected over 2,500 cases of these young children who were making these claims. So then our task becomes trying to sort out what is this? What is causing kids to say this? And one way to test this is to see if what the child says actually matches a particular person who lived and died in the past.
Ian Stevenson would actually go to the city, take the child with him, and in some cases the child would point to specific places, bringing up specific dates and places and names. Of course, we can't rule out coincidence. We can pretty much rule out fraud in most cases because Dr. Stevenson was a very careful investigator.
He wrote in an academic style and like a lawyer, presenting the witnesses, where the evidence came from. He had subjects take lie detector tests, sign affidavits. He was so concerned that the evidence would be accepted in the scientific community.
We use the term solved and unsolved. And solved means that a previous person has been identified whose life matches the statements that the child made. Of the 2,500, it's probably roughly 50-50 the ones that have been solved versus not solved.
Even to his dying day in 2007, he never claimed to the scientific world, I have got the ironclad proof. Remember, he had that skeptical spirit. Nevertheless, someone as careful as he was so strongly moved towards the possibility is, to me, a fairly powerful argument.
James Leininger is a little boy in Louisiana who began saying that his plane had crashed, that he had been shot down by the Japanese. He gave some very specific details. In fact, this was when he was 2. His parents were able to ask him questions about these horrific nightmares he had about a plane crash. And he was able to say that he had been shot down by the Japanese and that his plane had flown from the Natoma, is what he named the boat that his plane had taken off of. In addition, the boy later saw a picture of Iwo Jima and said that was where he was shot down. Also began saying that he was the 3rd James. When his dad searched online, he eventually found that there was the USS Natoma Bay. The Natoma Bay was involved in the Iwo Jima operation. There was one pilot from the Natoma that was killed in Iwo Jima, and his name was James Houston Jr. So James Leininger would be the 3rd James after the Jr. Another detail that James gave was that he had a friend named Jack Larson, and it turned out that there was another pilot on the Natoma named Jack Larson. The child was talking about a past life from more than 50 years before, which is unusual in our cases. So there's seemingly no way that he could have known the details that he came up with.
His father was an evangelical Christian who was totally resistant to reincarnation. But his son gave out so much information about World War II. They said, he could not have learned this watching Sesame Street.
I think that what reincarnates, as far as one can tell from all the literature and so on, is the essential self.
When I was about 2 years old, I told my mother that my name was not really Barbro, it was Anna.
Barbara was born in 1954 in Sweden to a Christian family, and they had no idea who Anne Frank was, because the diary of Anne Frank had not yet been translated and published in Sweden.
I know my name was Anna Frank, but they insist calling me on Barbara. And my parents insisted me to call them Mom and Pa, and I knew they were not my real parents.
Well, her parents thought this was all fantasy until something happened when she was 10 years old. By this time, the parents knew who Anne Frank, the historic figure, was. And they went on a tour of European cities, including Amsterdam, where the Anne Frank house is located.
We were at the hotel room, and my father said, let's do the Anne Frank house first. So I called for a cab. I found myself saying to them, we don't need a cab, we're not far away. And I knew exactly where we were.
And her parents said, how could you know? You've never been here. And she said, well, I know, let me show you. And she took him by the hand and led him on a 10-minute walk through the winding streets of Amsterdam directly to the Anne Frank house.
Then when we came up towards the house, I saw that the steps outside were different, were changed. So I stopped and I said, strange, they have changed those steps. And I came into that house. It was the most horrifying feeling I had ever had. Of course, all of a sudden I was back to my dreams. I recognized everything I had seen ever since I was a little child.
And Barbara looked at a wall in a room where Anne had spent time, and she said to her mother, look, the pictures of the movie stars are still on the wall.
I saw all these pictures from newspaper magazines that was cut out. And it was from movie stars and song stars and things. And I said to my mother, look, the pictures are still there. And it was like almost coming home. And she said, what pictures? And she looked on the wall, and I looked on the wall, and there were no pictures there.
She got confused, started to cry, and the mother said, well, let's ask the tour guide. And the tour guide said, yes, indeed, the photos that Anne Frank had clipped are normally on that wall, but we took them down because people were touching them, taking them. We're going to put them under glass and then put them back. And her parents at that point realized she was not having fantasies, that she was having memories of a past lifetime. Barbara not only had the memories, she also replicated the talent of Anne Frank and was a child prodigy writer.
It was everything from poetry to his stories, thoughts about the higher power, reincarnation, where we came from, where we were going. But nothing that I have memories from being Anne Frank or anything, because I had decided not to talk about it anymore.
And Barbara had her first book published at age 12, and she had another 8 or 9 books published in her teenage years. And her first book became the best-selling prose book in Swedish history. And guess what? Barbara has the same face as Anne Frank.
There's certainly evidence from our cases that there can be these memories from past lives that are in children. Now, evidence is not the same thing as proof, but there's no question that there is empirical evidence for it.
Okay. Something to think, yeah? So it's showing our existence beyond, deeper than the body and the mind. Now, Ian Stevenson, he died in 2007. Only his concern was that scientific world didn't accept, they could reject. American Medical Association indeed accepted his research and recognized it. At the same time, his concern was generally in the scientific people are not discussing enough about our real identity. The reason is you can provide some understanding about the self beyond the body and the mind, but still what to do with this understanding, how to live a life based on that. That kind of understanding is not provided. So when it comes to the ancient yoga wisdom, they will provide understanding how we can use it and how can we find a deeper satisfaction and happiness. So that's where we are connecting to the meditation, which is the next one, where we are connecting to the core of ourselves using mantra, which are spiritual sound vibration. So we'll do a short kirtan before we move to the lunch. So what we'll do, if you have any questions, we can discuss during the lunch hours. Alright? I'll be around. Thank you.